This is Mystery Port Chronicles. I am Nathaniel Aldridge, a man who watches, listens, and writes down the truth. Here, in the fog and lamplight of the harbor, every detail speaks. Evelyn Hart records the case files. I follow the clues, and together we bring light to places built on shadows. Let us begin. Progress has a sound in the year 1898. The rhythmic thunder of steel wheels on iron rails, the sharp whistle cutting through morning fog, the mechanical breathing of steam engines that connect London to Dover, Manchester to Edinburgh, civilization to itself. The Great Northern Express made this journey 6 times weekly, departing London Victoria at 6:15 a.m., arriving Dover Maritime at 9:47 a.m. precisely. 3 hours and 32 minutes of Victorian engineering perfection. On Tuesday, November 8th, that perfection died in the Blackwell Tunnel. We received the telegram at our Mystery Port office at 11:23 a.m. Emergency stop, Blackwell Tunnel, engineer dead, impossible circumstances, require immediate investigation, railway constabulary. Evelyn looked up from her morning correspondence, already reaching for her coat. A death on the rails, she said. They wouldn't summon us unless something was extraordinary. Or extraordinarily embarrassing, I replied, studying the telegram's urgent phrasing. The Great Northern is the pride of British railway engineering. Whatever happened in that tunnel threatens more than one man's life. We caught the next train to the incident site, a grim irony neither of us mentioned. The Blackwell Tunnel cut through half a mile of chalk downs between Ashford and Dover. A marvel of engineering when completed in 1891, it allowed the express to maintain speed through terrain that would otherwise require a 40-minute detour. But the tunnel had a peculiarity that made it both efficient and isolated. Railway protocol required the locomotive to separate from passenger carriages before entering, a safety measure in case of mechanical failure or fire in the confined space. The engine would proceed through alone, reconnect with carriages on the far side, and continue. 17 minutes of complete separation. 17 minutes when the locomotive crew was utterly alone in the darkness. We arrived to find the train halted half a mile beyond the tunnel's eastern exit. 6 passenger carriages stood silent on the tracks, their windows filled with anxious faces. The locomotive itself steamed quietly ahead, surrounded by railway officials and local constabulary. Railway Inspector Edmund Crow met us at the scene, a man of 50, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades around coal smoke and steam. "Mr. Aldridge, Miss Hart, thank God you've come. We don't understand what we're looking at." He led us to the locomotive's cabin. The engineering compartment was a cramped space of iron, brass, and soot. Pressure gauges lined the walls. The firebox glowed with residual heat. Coal dust covered every surface. And in the center, slumped against the control panel, was what remained of Thomas Ironwood. I say what remained because the body was wrong in ways that defied immediate explanation. His skin was blistered and red, as if scalded by superheated steam. His clothes were soaked through, but not with water, with something thicker, darker. His mouth was frozen open in a scream that no one had heard over the locomotive's roar. But his eyes were the worst. They stared forward with an expression of absolute terror mixed with something else, recognition, as if in his final moments Thomas Ironwood had understood exactly what was killing him. Dr. Bellamy was already examining the body when we arrived. The port medical examiner had been summoned from Dover and looked deeply troubled by his findings. Time of death approximately 8:47 a.m. Cause of death, he hesitated. Multiple causes, actually. Severe internal burns consistent with ingesting or inhaling superheated steam, but also signs of strychnine poisoning, convulsions, muscle rigidity, respiratory failure.
Steam burns and poison? Evelyn asked. How is that possible? It shouldn't be. Strychnine acts within 3 to 5 minutes. These burns would have occurred over a longer period, but the body shows evidence of both occurring simultaneously. I examined the cabin more carefully. The pressure gauges showed normal readings. The firebox was properly maintained. Nothing suggested mechanical failure that would cause a steam explosion. Who else was in this cabin? I asked Inspector Crow. Just the engineer and his fireman during the tunnel passage. It's standard protocol, minimal crew in the locomotive during separation. Where's the fireman now? Jack Sullivan. He's with the other railway personnel giving a statement. He's the one who found Ironwood when they emerged from the tunnel. And the passengers? Remained in the carriages during the separation. They never even knew anything was wrong until we stopped the train 20 minutes later. I studied the timeline more carefully. The locomotive separated from carriages at 8:30 a.m., entered Blackwell Tunnel, emerged at 8:47 a.m. That's exactly 17 minutes. Yes, sir. Standard procedure. The fireman says everything was normal when they entered. When they exited, Ironwood was already dead or dying. Who had access to this cabin during those 17 minutes? Inspector Crow shifted uncomfortably. That's the problem, Mr. Aldridge. 6 people had legitimate reason to be in or near the locomotive during that time. Any one of them could have done whatever this was. Show me the 6, I said. Jack Sullivan was 28 years old and looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 3 hours. We found him sitting in the station master's office at the Dover rail yard, still covered in coal dust and what might have been blood. His hands trembled as he tried to light a cigarette. "I've worked with Tom Ironwood for 4 years," he said before we asked anything. "Best engineer on the line. Careful, precise, never took risks, and now he's dead, and I don't understand what happened." "Tell us about this morning," Evelyn said gently, her notebook already open. Sullivan drew a shaking breath. "Normal departure from Victoria. Tom was quiet, but that wasn't unusual. He'd been tense the past week, wouldn't say why. We made standard time to Ashford, then began the approach to Blackwell Tunnel." "The separation procedure?" I prompted. "At 8:30, we slowed to 5 miles per hour. The coupling mechanism released the passenger carriages. We proceeded into the tunnel alone, just me, Tom, and the locomotive." "And then?" "Tom asked me to check the firebox temperature, said it felt like we were running hot. I opened the firebox door, examined the coals. Everything looked normal. I told him so." "How long did that take?" "Maybe 2 minutes. When I turned back around, Tom was different." "Different how?" Sullivan's eyes went distant, remembering. "He was sweating, not normal sweat from the heat. This was pouring off him like he had fever, and he was talking to himself, muttering. I couldn't make out the words over the engine noise." "What did you do?" "I asked if he was all right. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, 'They know. They all know. I made sure of it.' Then he grabbed the throttle and pushed us to maximum speed." "In the tunnel?" I asked sharply. "That's against protocol." "I know. I tried to pull him back, but he was stronger than he should have been, like he had unnatural strength. He kept pushing that throttle, and the pressure gauges were climbing into the red." "Then what happened?" "Then he started screaming, not in pain, in triumph, like he'd won something.
And the steam! Christ, the steam was everywhere. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. I thought the boiler was going to explode. Sullivan's hands shook harder. When we emerged from the tunnel, I could finally see again. Tom was slumped over the controls. I pulled the brake, brought us to a stop, but he was already gone. "You were with him the entire time?" Evelyn asked. "Every second. I never left that cabin." "Did anyone else enter during the tunnel passage?" "No one. It's impossible. We were moving, in darkness, in an enclosed space. No one could have gotten in or out." I studied Sullivan's face carefully. The trauma was genuine, but there was something else beneath it. "Mr. Sullivan, did Thomas Ironwood have enemies?" The fireman's expression darkened. "Everyone in management. He'd been documenting safety violations for months, said he had proof of criminal negligence, that he was going to expose it all when we reached Dover." "Expose what?" "Maintenance shortcuts, bribed inspectors, falsified safety reports. He said people had died because the railway prioritized profits over lives." "And he planned to reveal this today?" "There were journalists waiting at Dover Maritime Station. Tom had scheduled a press conference at 10 a.m. He was going to show them everything." Now the pieces began to form a pattern. A whistleblower engineer dead just before his planned exposure, an impossible crime in an isolated tunnel, and 6 people with access who might have wanted him silenced.
Edmund Crow's office at Dover Station was a study in railway bureaucracy. Walls covered with schedules, safety regulations, and incident reports that spoke of a man drowning in paperwork and responsibility. He poured himself a drink from a flask before we even sat down. "I've been a railway inspector for 23 years, he said. "I've seen accidents, mechanical failures, even a murder or two, but I've never seen anything like what happened to Thomas Ironwood." "Inspector Crow," I said carefully, "we understand you were aboard the train this morning, in an official capacity?" His jaw tightened. "I was performing a routine safety inspection. The Great Northern Express is our flagship service. We inspect it monthly." "And you had access to the locomotive during the tunnel passage?" "I had access to the entire train. That's my job." "Including the engineering cabin?" He set down his drink with more force than necessary. "Yes, I went forward to verify proper separation procedures. I was in the locomotive cabin for approximately 3 minutes during the tunnel passage." "At what time?" "Between 8:33 and 8:36, just after we entered the tunnel." "And Thomas Ironwood was alive then?" "Very much so. He was operating the locomotive normally. I verified pressure readings, checked safety equipment, then returned to the passenger carriages through the communication corridor." "The communication corridor?" Evelyn asked. "A narrow passageway that runs along the exterior of the locomotive during separation. It's for emergency access. Technically, crew can move between the engine and carriages even when separated, though it's dangerous and rarely used." This was crucial information. The crime scene wasn't as isolated as we'd been told. "Who else knew about this corridor?" I asked. "All railway personnel, and some experienced passengers, anyone who's studied the train's design." "Inspector Crow, what was your relationship with Thomas Ironwood?" His face went carefully neutral. "Professional. He was a competent engineer. I had no complaints about his work." "Even though he was documenting safety violations that would reflect poorly on your inspections?" The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. "Thomas Ironwood," Crow said slowly, "was a man who didn't understand the complexities of railway management. Yes, we make compromises. Yes, we balance safety against efficiency, but we do it within acceptable parameters." "Acceptable to whom?"
Evelyn asked. Acceptable to the railway, to the investors, to the thousands of passengers who depend on reliable, affordable service. And when those compromises kill people? Crow's expression hardened. Accidents happen. They always have. Ironwood wanted perfection in an imperfect world. He didn't understand that exposing every minor violation would destroy public confidence in the entire railway system. So you had motive to silence him, I said. I had motive to convince him to be reasonable, which is different from murder. Is it? He met my eyes directly. I inspected that locomotive, Mr. Aldridge. I was in that cabin 3 minutes after entering the tunnel. Ironwood was alive, healthy, and operating normally. Whatever killed him happened after I left. Unless you poisoned him before you left, Evelyn suggested. With what? I carried inspection equipment, nothing more. Strychnine is easily concealed. An axe within 3 to 5 minutes. I left at 8:36. Ironwood died at 8:47. That's 11 minutes. The timeline does not support poisoning while I was present. He was right about the timeline, unless the poison had been modified somehow, unless someone had found a way to delay its effect. Inspector Crow, I said, I'll need to see your inspection records for the Great Northern Express, all of them, going back 2 years. His hand tightened on his flask. Those are confidential railway documents. This is a murder investigation. They're evidence now. After a long moment, he nodded. I'll have them sent to your office, but you'll find everything in order, Mr. Aldridge. My inspections are thorough and honest. Then you have nothing to fear from scrutiny. As we left his office, Evelyn whispered, He's hiding something. Everyone on this train is hiding something. The question is whether they're hiding embarrassment or murder.
Mrs. Harriet Blackwood managed the first-class ticket office at Victoria Station, a position of considerable responsibility and access in the rigid hierarchy of Victorian railways. She was 43, handsome rather than beautiful, with the composed demeanor of a woman who'd learned to navigate a man's world through intelligence and discretion. We met her in the station's administrative offices, where she'd been detained for questioning. She knew why we were there before we spoke. Thomas and I were lovers, she said immediately, 5 years ago. It ended badly. He wanted marriage, I wanted independence. He never quite forgave me. Her directness was either refreshing honesty or calculated misdirection. When did you last see him? I asked. This morning, at 6 a.m., before the express departed. He came to my office, said he wanted to talk before the press conference. What did he say? She looked away, something vulnerable crossing her face. He apologized, said he'd been wrong to pressure me years ago, that he understood now why I'd chosen my career over marriage, and then he asked if I'd forgive him. Forgive him for what? For what he was about to do. He said the exposé would hurt people, good people caught in a corrupt system, but that it had to be done anyway. Did he mention specific names? No, but he was strange, emotional in a way Tom never was. He kept saying, they'll understand eventually, and sometimes one person has to carry the weight. Mrs. Blackwood, Evelyn said gently, you have access to the entire station, including supplies, medical supplies. The implication hung in the air. You think I poisoned him because of a relationship that ended 5 years ago? Revenge can be patient. Harriet laughed bitterly. If I'd wanted revenge on Thomas Ironwood, I would have destroyed his reputation years ago. I know things about him, about his family, his finances, his mistakes, that would have ruined him. I didn't use them because I'm not a monster. Then why were you on the train this morning?
Ticket sellers don't normally travel with the express." Her composure finally cracked slightly. "Because Tom asked me to be there. He gave me a first-class ticket and said, 'I need someone I trust present, just in case.'" "In case of what?" "He wouldn't say, but he seemed frightened, like he knew something terrible might happen." "Did he suspect someone would try to kill him?" "I think he suspected he might not survive the day, whether by murder or something else." The phrasing was odd. "Something else?" Evelyn pressed. "Tom had been acting strangely for weeks, taking risks, making arrangements. He updated his will, wrote letters to people. It was almost like he was preparing for death." "Suicidal?" I suggested. "No, not exactly. More like resigned, like he'd made a decision and was seeing it through regardless of cost." She pulled a small envelope from her purse. "He gave me this at Victoria, said to open it only if something happened to him. I opened it an hour ago." Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Thomas Ironwood's neat handwriting. "Harriet, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Know that I chose this path. The exposure must happen, and I'm the only one willing to pay the price. Look after my daughter. Tell her I did this for all the daughters whose fathers died in accidents that were really negligence. Some trains can only be stopped by throwing yourself on the tracks. T.I." Evelyn and I exchanged glances. This wasn't the letter of a man expecting to be murdered. It was the letter of a man planning something far more complex. Victor Sterling's engineering workshop occupied a converted warehouse near Dover Port, a space filled with blueprints, prototype engines, and the smell of machine oil and ambition. Sterling himself was 35, brilliant and bitter about it. Thomas Ironwood was an adequate engineer, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Competent, careful, completely lacking in vision. He maintained old systems. I invent new ones. "You were aboard the express this morning," I said. "Why?" "I was invited. The railway board wanted me to observe the current locomotive's performance. They're considering my new engine design for the next generation of express trains." Convenient timing, just when Ironwood was planning to expose railway corruption. Sterling smiled coldly. "You think I killed him to secure the contract? Please, my designs speak for themselves. I don't need to murder the competition." "Then why were you in the locomotive cabin during the tunnel passage?" His smile faded slightly. "Who told you that?" "We know 6 people had access during those 17 minutes. You were one of them." He was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine. Yes, I was in the cabin, observing the engine's performance under tunnel conditions. It's relevant to my design work." "And Thomas Ironwood?" "Was operating the locomotive normally when I arrived at 8:38. I was there for approximately 4 minutes, taking notes on pressure management and coal consumption. Then I returned to the first-class carriage." "Did you speak with him?" "Briefly. I asked about the throttle response. He answered technically. That's all." "Did he seem ill? Distressed?" "He seemed intense, focused, like a man with something on his mind beyond operating the train." Victor pulled out a leather notebook filled with technical drawings and measurements. "Here, my observations from this morning, everything documented. You'll see I was conducting legitimate research, not plotting murder." I examined the notes. They were detailed, precise, professional. Too perfect. "Mr. Sterling, what were the safety violations Thomas Ironwood was planning to expose?" "I have no idea." "Don't you? You've been studying these trains for months. Surely you'd noticed the maintenance shortcuts, the compromised safety equipment, the falsified inspection reports."
His expression went carefully neutral. If I'd noticed criminal negligence, I would have reported it. Would you? Or would you have kept silent, knowing that a scandal might delay adoption of your new designs? After all, if the current system is exposed as corrupt, the Railway Board might be too cautious to invest in innovation. That's speculation. Is it? Because it seems to me you had perfect motive to want Ironwood silenced, not out of guilt, but out of ambition. His exposé threatened the entire railway industry, including your future contracts. Sterling stood up abruptly. This interview is over. If you have actual evidence, present it. Otherwise, stop wasting my time with conspiracy theories. As we left his workshop, Evelyn said, "He's right about one thing. His motive is weak. Killing Ironwood wouldn't stop the exposé if documentation already existed." "Unless," I replied, "the information was aboard the train, in Ironwood's possession, where it could be destroyed after his death. You think Sterling was after the evidence? I think everyone on that train had their own reasons to want Thomas Ironwood dead. We just need to determine which reason led to action."
Lord Richard Ashford maintained a private railway carriage, luxury accommodation fitted with leather seats, polished wood, and the unmistakable scent of privilege and power. We found him still aboard, conducting business correspondence as if a man hadn't died horrifically just carriages away. "Mr. Aldridge," he said without looking up, "I've been expecting you. Do sit down." He was 60, distinguished, with the absolute confidence of inherited wealth and political connections. "Lord Ashford, you're the primary investor in the Great Northern Railway," I began. "One of several investors, but yes, I have significant holdings. And Thomas Ironwood was planning to expose safety violations that would damage those investments. He was planning to make accusations. Whether they constituted exposure depends on their validity. You don't believe they were valid? I believe Thomas Ironwood was a conscientious man who confused imperfection with corruption. Yes, compromises are made. Yes, maintenance is sometimes delayed. But calling it criminal negligence, that's hyperbole from someone who didn't understand business realities." "Business realities that resulted in deaths?" Lord Ashford finally looked at me directly. "Deaths happen, Mr. Aldridge, in factories, in mines, in construction. The world is dangerous. We minimize risk where economically feasible, but perfection is impossible and prohibitively expensive." So Ironwood's accusations were inconvenient truths? They were inflammatory exaggerations that would have destroyed public confidence in the entire railway system, cost thousands of jobs, bankrupted investors who'd done nothing wrong. And for what? To satisfy one man's need to feel morally superior? "To prevent future deaths," Evelyn said quietly. "At the cost of present livelihoods. It's a calculation, Miss Hart, one that idealists never understand." "You were in the locomotive cabin this morning during the tunnel passage." He didn't deny it. "I was. I have special privileges as primary investor. I wanted to observe the engine performance firsthand." "At what time?" 8:41 to 8:44, approximately 3 minutes. "And Ironwood was alive?" "Very much so, though he seemed unwell, sweating, muttering. I asked if he needed medical attention. He told me to leave, quite rudely, actually." "And you did? Just left?" "What else would I do? Force medical care on a man who refused it? I returned to my carriage and thought nothing more of it until we stopped." "Did you poison him, Lord Ashford?" He smiled without warmth. "If I'd wanted to stop Ironwood's exposé, I would have used lawyers, not poison. Legal action is far more reliable and considerably less illegal." "Unless legal action wouldn't work fast enough. Then I would have bought him off. Everyone has a price, Mr. Aldridge, even crusaders. Did you try? 3 weeks ago, I offered him £10,000 to delay his press conference, allow the railway time to address issues quietly. He refused. How did you respond to that refusal? I increased the offer to £25,000. He refused again, said some things couldn't be bought. Lord Ashford's expression hardened. So yes, I had motive. I stood to lose considerable money if Ironwood's accusations became public, but I also had better methods than murder, and I certainly wouldn't have chosen such a theatrical method aboard my own railway. Unless the theatricality served a purpose, I suggested. A dramatic death might overshadow the accusations, turn Ironwood into a tragic figure rather than a credible whistleblower. That's clever, Mr. Aldridge, almost too clever, which suggests you're giving me credit for more cunning than I possess. As we departed his carriage, he called after us. One more thing. Whatever documentation Ironwood claimed to have, it's probably not as damning as he believed. Crusaders always exaggerate the evidence. Reality is rarely as dramatic as the accusation.
Samuel Pine operated the onboard telegraph system, a recent innovation that allowed the Great Northern Express to send and receive messages even while in motion. We found him in the communications carriage, still at his post, fingers occasionally tapping out messages in the rhythmic language of Morse code. He was 26, nervous, with ink-stained fingers and the pale complexion of someone who spent days indoors with machinery. "I was the last person to see Thomas Ironwood alive," he said immediately, "or one of the last." "Tell us," Evelyn prompted gently. "I was in the locomotive cabin from 8:44 to 8:46, just 2 minutes. I needed to verify the communication line integrity through the tunnel." "And Ironwood?" "Was dying, I think. He was convulsing, foam at his mouth. I tried to help, but he pushed me away, told me to send a message." "What message?" Pine pulled out a crumpled telegram form. "To Dover maritime journalists, stop. Evidence in firebox, stop. Left compartment, stop. Proof of negligence, stop. Ironwood." "He dictated this while dying?" I asked. "Not dictated. He'd already written it, handed it to me, said, 'Send this at 8:50 exactly, not before.' Then he collapsed." "Did you send it?" "Yes, at 8:50 precisely. By then we'd emerged from the tunnel. I didn't know he was already dead. I thought he'd just passed out." "Mr. Pine, why were you the last person in the cabin, after the inspector, after Sterling, after Lord Ashford? Why did you arrive at 8:44? He looked uncomfortable. "Because I was avoiding Tom. He'd been angry with me for weeks." "About what?" "About messages I'd intercepted. Part of my job is monitoring all telegraph communications for security purposes. I'd seen messages between railway management discussing the safety violations Tom was documenting. They knew he was building a case. They were planning a response." "What kind of response?" "Legal threats, character assassination. One message specifically discussed neutralizing Ironwood before Dover. I didn't know if that meant legally or otherwise." "Did you warn him?" Pine's hands shook slightly. "No, I reported the messages to management, like I'm supposed to, and Tom found out somehow, called me a traitor, said I was complicit in covering up deaths." "Were you?" "I was doing my job. I'm just a telegraphist. I send and receive messages. I'm not responsible for their content." "Except when that content relates to murder," Evelyn said quietly. "I didn't know they were planning to kill him. I thought neutralizing meant legal action, discrediting him, not poison and steam burns and whatever horror happened in that cabin." I studied the telegram form again. Evidence in firebox, left compartment. That's specific. Did you check? No, I sent the message and returned to my post. The railway constabulary has been with the locomotive since we stopped. If there's evidence there, they'll find it. Unless, I said slowly, someone aboard this train knew about it and destroyed it during the confusion after Ironwood's death. Pine's face went pale. You think that's what this was about? Not just killing him, but destroying evidence? I think Thomas Ironwood was a meticulous man. If he says evidence exists, it exists. The question is whether it still exists now. We returned to the locomotive, accompanied by Railway Constabulary and Dr. Bellamy. The firebox was the heart of the engine, a roaring chamber where coal burned at extreme temperatures to heat water into steam that drove the massive pistons. Opening it while the engine was still hot was dangerous, but necessary. Inspector Crow supervised the procedure, his face carefully neutral, as railway workers used long tools to carefully extract unburned coal and ash. There, Evelyn said, pointing. At the very back of the firebox, protected from direct flame by a layer of coal, was a metal document case, fire-blackened but intact. We waited for it to cool before opening. Inside, a leather journal, slightly scorched but readable. Thomas Ironwood's documentation. Page after page of safety violations. Boiler pressure tests falsified, brake system maintenance delayed beyond safe limits, wheel bearings used beyond replacement schedules, fire suppression equipment removed to save weight, emergency procedures ignored to maintain timetables, and worse, accidents that resulted. August 12, 1896, Manchester Express derailment, 7 deaths, official cause, track failure, actual cause, worn wheel bearings, overdue replacement by 400 miles. March 3, 1897, Dover freight collision, 3 deaths, official cause, signaling error, actual cause, brake system failure, maintenance delayed 6 weeks. June 18, 1897, London Leeds passenger fire, 12 deaths, official cause, passenger smoking, actual cause, no fire suppression equipment, removed to increase passenger capacity. More entries, dozens of them, each documented with dates, technical details, and copies of falsified inspection reports, each signed by Inspector Edmund Crow. "Dear God," Dr. Bellamy whispered, "this is proof of systemic negligence resulting in deaths." Crow stood frozen, his face the color of ash. "Those inspections were... I was under pressure. The railway demanded efficiency. We couldn't afford the downtime for perfect maintenance." "People died," Evelyn said, her voice cutting. 34 people in those 3 accidents alone, and you covered it up." "I didn't cover up anything. I filed reports." "Reports you falsified," I finished, holding up a page comparing Crow's official inspection to Ironwood's actual measurements. The discrepancies were damning. But there was something else in the journal. A final entry dated yesterday. "I have copied this documentation and sent it to 3 separate locations. The railway cannot destroy all copies. Tomorrow I board the Great Northern Express one final time. I will carry the original documentation in the firebox, the one place they cannot search without exposing themselves. I expect they will try to stop me. They may succeed, but the truth is already beyond their reach. If I die tomorrow, let this journal explain why. Not because I was murdered, but because I chose to place myself in a position where murder would expose the very corruption it sought to hide. Some trains can only be stopped by throwing yourself on the tracks. T.I. The implication was staggering. He expected to die, Evelyn said. He planned for it. More than that, I replied, studying the entry carefully. He engineered a situation where his death would serve his purpose better than his survival. Dr. Bellamy looked at Ironwood's body, understanding dawning. The poison, the steam burns, multiple causes of death. This wasn't one killer's method. It was multiple people acting independently, each thinking they were murdering him, not knowing others were doing the same. Inspector Crow sank into a chair. This is impossible. You're saying multiple people poisoned him simultaneously? I'm saying Thomas Ironwood created conditions where multiple people would have opportunity and motive to kill him, and I believe he knew exactly what he was doing.
We assembled all 6 suspects in the station master's office, a grim tribunal where truth would finally be extracted. Jack Sullivan, Inspector Crow, Harriet Blackwood, Victor Sterling, Lord Ashford, Samuel Pine. All had been aboard the train. All had access to the locomotive during those 17 minutes. All had motive. Thomas Ironwood didn't die from one cause, I began. He died from multiple causes, acting in concert. Dr. Bellamy, your findings. The doctor stood, his expression grave. The autopsy revealed 3 distinct causes of death occurring simultaneously. First, strychnine poisoning, ingested approximately 8:35 a.m., but modified with cocaine to delay symptoms. Second, severe internal burns from inhaling superheated steam, occurring around 8:45 a.m. Third, respiratory failure from a combination of the above plus possible carbon monoxide exposure. 3 separate methods, Evelyn said, which means at least 3 of you tried to kill Thomas Ironwood this morning, each using a different method, each thinking you were the sole murderer, each unaware the others were acting simultaneously. The silence in the room was absolute. "That's absurd," Lord Ashford said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Let me reconstruct what happened during those 17 minutes in the Blackwell Tunnel." I pulled out the timeline I'd constructed. 8:30 a.m. Locomotive separates from carriages. Ironwood and Sullivan enter tunnel. 8:33 a.m. Inspector Crow enters cabin. Routine inspection. Duration, 3 minutes. Inspector, you were first. You had access to Ironwood's morning coffee, prepared before departure. You added strychnine modified with cocaine, a formula that would delay symptoms for approximately 12 minutes, just long enough for you to establish an alibi elsewhere. Crow's face went white. You learned about this modification through your railway inspections. It's used in veterinary medicine for large animals, easily obtained, difficult to detect. I didn't. Yes, you did, because Ironwood's journal implicated you directly. Years of falsified inspections, deaths you could have prevented. You couldn't let him reach Dover and expose you. Crow's shoulders sagged. The coffee at Victoria Station. I added the compound while Tom was briefing Sullivan. I thought he'd collapse during the journey, appear to die of natural causes, heart failure. I didn't know. You didn't know others were planning the same thing. I turned to the next suspect. 8:38 a.m. Victor Sterling entered cabin, observing engine performance. Duration, 4 minutes. Mr. Sterling, you tampered with the steam valve, a small adjustment that would cause superheated steam to leak into the cabin, invisible in the smoke and darkness of the tunnel. Ironwood would breathe it in, burning his lungs from the inside. Sterling's face was a mask of stone. You're an engineer.
You understood exactly how to create this effect, and you had perfect cover. Observing performance gave you access to the mechanism. He was going to destroy the entire railway industry, my designs, my future, everything I'd worked for, all because he wanted to be a martyr. So you made him one. 8:41 a.m. Lord Ashford entered cabin. Investor inspection. Duration, 3 minutes. Lord Ashford, you're a careful man. You wouldn't rely on poison or mechanical failure. You brought an insurance policy. I held up a small vial recovered from his carriage. Arsenic solution, added to the water reservoir that feeds the steam system. As the engine ran, the arsenic would vaporize with the steam. Ironwood would inhale it gradually, another natural cause of death. Ashford's expression didn't change. You have no proof that vial contains arsenic or that I added anything to the water system. I have your presence in the cabin at precisely the right time, your financial motive, and Dr. Bellamy's findings of arsenic in Ironwood's lung tissue. 8:44 a.m. Samuel Pine entered cabin. Communication line check. Duration, 2 minutes. Mr. Pine, you were the last person to see Ironwood alive. You witnessed him dying from the combined effects of 3 separate murder methods, and you sent his final telegram as requested. I tried to help him, Pine protested. I didn't know what was happening. Because you weren't trying to kill him. You were just complicit in his death by warning management of his plans. You gave them time to act. I looked at the 3 who'd actively attempted murder. Inspector Crow poisoned him. Victor Sterling sabotaged the steam valve. Lord Ashford contaminated the water supply. 3 separate murder methods occurring simultaneously. Each would have killed him individually. Together, they created the horrific death we witnessed. But that's not all, Evelyn said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Thomas Ironwood knew. He knew, I confirmed. His journal entry proves it. He engineered this entire situation, created conditions where multiple people would attempt to murder him simultaneously. Why? Harriet Blackwood whispered. Why would anyone do that? Because, I said, a simple murder could be covered up. One killer could be silenced or bought off, but multiple killers, acting independently, with different methods, that's impossible to cover up. It guarantees investigation, guarantees exposure. Dr. Bellamy looked at Ironwood's body with new understanding. He committed suicide by conspiracy, made himself a target, ensured his death would be so complex, so theatrical, that the truth would have to come out. He sacrificed himself, Evelyn said softly, threw himself on the tracks to stop the train.
The arrests were swift. Inspector Edmund Crow charged with murder, his falsified inspections exposed, dozens of deaths attributable to his negligence. Victor Sterling charged with murder, his engineering brilliance turned to homicide. Lord Richard Ashford charged with murder, his wealth and connections proved insufficient shields against evidence. Samuel Pine charged as accessory, his intercepted messages made him complicit. Jack Sullivan cleared. The fireman had been exactly what he appeared, a loyal employee and unwitting witness. Harriet Blackwood cleared. Her presence had been at Ironwood's request to serve as witness to his final hours. The trials lasted 4 months. All 3 murderers were convicted, though legal precedent struggled with the concept of simultaneous independent murder. Crow hanged. Sterling transported to Australia for life. Lord Richard Ashford, through legal maneuverings and influence, received only 20 years imprisonment. But the true impact came from Ironwood's journal. The documented safety violations sparked national outrage. Railway reform swept through Parliament. New safety regulations were mandated. Inspection procedures were overhauled, criminal penalties established for falsified safety reports. 34 deaths from past accidents were reclassified as negligent homicides. Families received compensation. The Great Northern Railway Company was restructured, all because one engineer decided his death could accomplish what his life couldn't. On the Dover station platform at dawn, Evelyn closed her notebook. "Another case finished," she said, "but this one feels different." I watched early morning trains departing, gleaming locomotives hauling carriages full of passengers who would never know how their safety was purchased with one man's calculated suicide. Thomas Ironwood wasn't murdered, not really. He orchestrated his own death, made himself bait for killers he knew would come. Is that better or worse than murder? I don't know. He saved lives through his death. The reforms prevent future accidents, but he also manipulated 3 people into becoming killers. They chose to kill him, Evelyn pointed out. He just created the opportunity. Did he? Or did he create conditions where murder seemed the only option? There's a fine line between opportunity and entrapment. She looked at me with those steady, questioning eyes. Would you do what Ironwood did? Sacrifice yourself to expose corruption? I thought carefully before answering. I want to believe I'd have his courage, but I also hope I'd never face a situation where suicide is the only path to justice. That's not an answer. Because there isn't a clear answer. Ironwood was simultaneously victim and architect of his own death, martyr and manipulator, hero and possibly something darker. As we walked back toward our office, Evelyn penned the final line. Case File 11 resolved, but in the fog of Mystery Port, another lantern always waits to be lit.